Bow hunting takes a lot of practice to develop that confidence in your shots. Having confidence in your shots is so important when it comes time to make that ethical, clean shot on that monster buck you've had your eye on all year. The very second that you start thinking about your shot, the second you start getting into your head, is the second you're going to start losing confidence. You're going to start focusing on where's your anchor point, how are your feet standing, are you balanced? Just a million other things are going to go through your head instead of executing that clean shot. Your shots should come together through muscle memory. I mean, you shouldn't even have to think about it. You just need to be in that flow state where things are just happening and you didn't even have to concentrate on it. So in this video, we're going to go over 4 foundational tips plus 1 practice tip to help you build your confidence and your accuracy. And tip number 1 is where everything starts, and it's in your stance. Most self-taught archers, and probably a lot who are taught by somebody else, start out with the wrong stance. This is an absolute accuracy killer. Your stance is your foundation, and if your foundation is unstable, then your body has to compensate, and that can just throw off your balance. You should face the target at about 45 degrees. That means don't do this, and obviously don't do this. So about right here in the middle. And it keeps everything in line. Your shoulders and your hips and your toes are all going to end up in the same plane. And your feet need to be about shoulder width apart, you know, the normal athletic stance, and they need to be about 45 degrees to the target. Remember, you need to keep your toes, your hips, and your shoulders pretty well in the same line. Otherwise, you're going to be off balance and all twisted up, and you're not going to hit crap. And tip number 2 is all about the grip. Your grip on your bow should be relaxed. You don't want to grip it so tight that your knuckles turn all white, because that's just going to tense up the rest of your arm. And with your arm that tense, you're not going to be very accurate, and you increase your chances of putting some torque on that bow. And you can probably find a lot of YouTube videos where somebody put a torque on a bow and it blew up in their face. Grip your bow with either your thumb and index finger touching or your thumb and ring finger touching. Leave the other fingers open. This keeps everything loose and prevents you from torquing the bow one way or the other. Now, if you have trouble with that, you can always shoot just open-handed, but you have to have a wrist sling on there. Now, that probably isn't an issue because most people have a wrist sling on their bow regardless of how they shoot. And tip number 3 is to make sure that you're using an appropriate draw weight for you. It seems like draw weight, at least for beginners, has become like the new bench press. It's like beginners are trying to pull as much weight as they possibly can, like it's some indication of their overall strength. Your drawback should be smooth. If you have to twist your back, or if you have to start way up here, I just hit my light. If you have to start, pull from way up here, or start, aiming down low, you're pulling way too much weight. Now, when you draw, you should have your arm extended toward the target. Don't lock your elbow out, but have it extended toward the target, and then pull from here like that. Don't pull like this. You don't want to push the bow toward the target at the same time. You want to keep it where it needs to be aimed and pull straight back. Pulling too much weight is probably the second biggest mistake that beginners make. It's definitely in the top 3. You need to put your ego to the side and start out with a lower pound draw. Build that foundation, and then you can tune up the weight to your liking. And tip number 4 is probably one you hear all the time, but it's worth mentioning anytime you talk about accuracy, and that is do not punch the trigger. Now, this is probably one of the most difficult things to master. That's why it's mentioned so often. It really takes a lot of practice to make it muscle memory. One thing I've found that has really helped is to keep the trigger tight to the second knuckle, the crease of the second knuckle, right there. If you just use the tip of your index finger, there's too much of a chance you're just going to punch that trigger. But if you keep it tight to that second knuckle, it becomes easier to just squeeze the trigger rather than pull it. The bow should surprise you when it goes off. If you anticipate the shot, you're going to flinch, and your shot's going to go off in random direction. And the 5th tip is that one practice tip that I was talking about, and that is to incorporate blind bail practice. Blind bail practice is just like it sounds. You're shooting at a target with your eyes closed. Now, you're not 20 or 30 yards away from the target. You are as far away from the target as required for the arrow to leave the bow safely. Now, blind bail takes target panic out of the equation. You're able to concentrate just on your form, just on the fundamentals and how you're pulling that trigger. And when you're not worried about where that arrow is going to go, assuming you have it set up in a safe way to where no matter where the arrow goes, it's not going to be dangerous, you can focus solely on developing that muscle memory. once you do that enough, do it once a week if you need to, or even more. And eventually you will get to the point where you don't even have to think about what you're doing. It just happens naturally. Like I said, try to do this once a week, if not more. I'm definitely guilty of claiming to be too busy to do it sometimes, but I promise you, if you make time to fit in some blind bale practice, you will be much more accurate. And if you have any more accuracy tips, leave those down in the comments below. There are probably a million things you could be doing wrong that's affecting your accuracy, but if you use the tips that we talked about and then incorporate that into some blind bale practice, you can be sure that your form is not going to be one of them. And hit that like button if you like this video, and if you found it useful and think somebody else will, please share the video. It definitely helps the channel grow. And make sure that you're subscribed so you can stay informed.